that tall gentleman who ran that way to start with the session. But please bear with us, and I hope you enjoy the engagements and the discussions as well. Thank you. Oh, he's actually getting one of the main important panelists, the mayor, as well. So yeah, just wait for the political head to come through as well. Did you find him? You can take over.
Thank you very much. I was looking for our last panelist who is coming, the mayor of Banjul. So, like James just introduced, the idea is not to make another session as we've done earlier this afternoon with some same institutions, but really to see what are the practices from those institutions, from those stakeholders on finance, really in the spirit of exchanging experiences and vision on what has been done. And so I would like to start with the DFIs, the donors, the development finance institution perspective. Samir shared with us the vision and the experiences you were developing at global level. But really on the two focus of today, we have the financial institutions and we have local governments. So on the World Bank perspective, what are the experiences, concrete practices of the World Bank to support financial intermediaries like FDL or FEC in Morocco, but also what are your practical experiences on cities?
So this panel builds somewhat on what we've discussed before, so we're not going to be repeating what we've mentioned before, and the area of focus are twofold. One, which is how the World Bank works directly with municipalities. I've had the chance to very briefly exchange with the mayor of Banjul about some of the works that the World Bank tries to focus on. And predominantly here, I mean, there's two tracks of work, one at the national government and one at the local government level. At the local government level, we work hand in hand with the municipalities to build their capacity on increasing their own source revenues, because that is the key to expanding their debt capacity, expanding their ability to invest in infrastructure. So that is the main area of focus that we work on. For the large majority of our work, I mean, we're building the foundations in terms of property taxation, introducing systems of, first building the cadasters of property, how to update them, building practices of mass valuation or other forms of valuation of that land and real estate, bringing international best practice so that the governments can set the foundations of systems of property taxation that work well for them. We benchmark cities and municipalities against comparators within the sub-region and elsewhere, so that they can benchmark which areas of their revenues they could do more on, whether it's fees, levies, etc. Beyond this work, there's then work on helping municipalities also rationalize their expenditures, prepare prioritized capital investment plans that reflect their needs, and at the same time which prioritize infrastructure that supports resilience, etc. We work with them also on doing an area that is often lacking but is really critical, is the whole area of asset management. So looking at building inventories of their assets in terms of land and real estate, looking at ways to leverage, valorize, value those assets, and thinking about methods by which they can generate revenues and proceeds, whether it's by virtue of the sale or the lease or otherwise of such assets. We look also for municipalities that have situations of indebtedness, about thinking about issues related to contingent liabilities, debt restructuring, etc. And then putting these municipalities on a path of creditworthiness. Usually it involves commissioning a credit rating with the municipalities. We've worked with Moody's and other rating agencies to bring that capacity for municipality so that you can eventually put them on that path to creditworthiness. We have a program called the Creditworthiness Initiative, which provides all this work from the beginning, from the municipal revenue enhancement all the way to the credit rating onto issuance of a first obligation. But as you can imagine, there's no magic wand. This is not something that a municipality can enter into one day and then immediately a week thereafter will be able to go and issue a bond. This is painstaking work that takes years. We also work, like you've mentioned, Jean-Francois, with the intermediaries. Whether their funds at the national government, like the FECL or otherwise, which provide channel resources from national governments to local governments, structuring these funds, the formulas by which these funds operate. As I mentioned earlier, we usually try to structure these intergovernmental fiscal transfers in two tranches. One tranche looks at basically the endowments of a given municipality, meaning there's usually a head count, so you get a certain percentage of resources that is a function of population. Usually you introduce formulas related to depth of poverty, access to services and infrastructure, so that you can achieve the policy objectives of that fund. If it's an equalization fund, then clearly it's trying to provide more resources for the municipalities that have historically been marginalized or suffer from more acute poverties or otherwise. But at the same time, it's not just the entitlement component. We usually try to structure a performance component as well. And that performance component puts in place policy objectives that the government wants to achieve. For instance, government wants to reward municipalities that improve their municipal revenues. So it would then allocate more resources to the municipalities that meet their targets. And therefore, you put in place a system that gives that basic entitlement plus a performance-related component so that you can enhance performance by the municipalities, but also you put in place the capacity building so that the municipalities that might historically have lesser capacity would not be suffering and be left behind. So these are, if you will, the two modalities. We also work with intermediaries like municipal development banks, whether it's Findeter in Colombia or otherwise, where you help structure that bank or that municipal development fund, like the one we have in Palestine, among other places, and also regional infrastructure investment funds like the one we have in Indonesia. So all these financial intermediaries, including the structuring of the intergovernmental fiscal transfers, complement the work that we do directly with the municipalities themselves.
Okay, thank you very much, Samer, very clear, and I think it was very interesting that you recall also that the World Bank is not just an instrument to work with national level or governments, like is usually seen, but you are working more and more with municipalities and for municipalities through the national intermediation. And I think this is something that we need to have also in scope, that the World Bank is a major stakeholder on municipal finance programs. On your last point, you mentioned also the fact that you were working with financial intermediaries like subnational development banks. In the UCLG strategy, those stakeholders are at the core of how to improve and how to support cities to reinforce their capacities to access finance or to diversify their finance. And so for FMDV also, it's stakeholders that we support strongly, because we do believe that they are central stakeholders to access international funds, but then to work at municipal level. And that's right today within our panel we have three representatives from those intermediaries. And I will start with Tsepo Nsiname from the DBSA, head of metros, intermediary cities and water management, to ask you two things. On your perspective as a practitioner on a daily basis, how do you discuss and how do you work concretely with DFIs such as the World Bank, but also other bilateral agencies? And then how do you work with cities, not on a project approach, but on the perspective to support them to accelerate municipal finance for urban development? In 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Maybe before I get to the issues around how we work with development finance institutions and other potential lenders to municipalities in our country, I must first start by saying not all municipalities are born equal. And in South Africa, we've got 257 municipalities. 8 of them are metropolitan municipalities, and then we've got intermediate cities, about 39 of them. Now, the issue is, even within that category of municipalities, not all of them are born equal. I mean, here where we are right now in Durban, the municipality is a metropolitan municipality. And it's got a better credit rating, and we've got a credit rating agency next to us. It's got a better credit rating than another municipality like City of Johannesburg, which is also a metropolitan municipality. Now, the issue is municipalities in South Africa have got certain specific responsibilities, and those responsibilities we'll get to when I discuss them, how we work with them. Now, in order for them to meet those responsibilities, they require, amongst other things, funding. And those responsibilities, one, are constitutional obligations, which are then supported by various legislative prescripts. And over and above that, there are legitimate community expectations. First of all, we are trying to undo the legacy of the apartheid system that fell in 1994. That meant, for example, people that were excluded in 1994 now had to be provided with services. That means, therefore, that the municipalities have got major responsibilities in terms of their funding requirement. And as a result, the DBSA, which is a local development finance institution, would require funding. In the past, we were the main lender to municipalities. And in order to lend, for us to lend to those municipalities, especially the metropolitan municipalities, we therefore required funding. We are a development finance institution owned by the South African government, 100%, but it doesn't mean that we're funded by the South African government. We therefore raise money in the local domestic market by issuing bonds and also borrow from the international development finance institutions. We haven't had an opportunity yet to borrow from the World Bank, but we have partnered with AFD from France. They are one of our major funders. We have also partnered with KfW from Germany. We have also partnered with the EIB, European Investment Bank. We've also partnered with the African Development Bank. They have been providing direct funding to the DBSA, which we then on-lend to municipalities. But now, with the evolving nature of municipalities and the increased demands, it also means that we have to look at new ways of collaborating with the international as well as local DFI partners. And some of them are now increasingly playing a direct lending role to municipalities. So how do we partner with them? And the beautiful thing about the international development finance institutions that are playing in the South African space, which talks to what National Treasury, is very happy about. They don't want the development finance institutions to crowd out the private sector in South Africa. I mean, we've got assets in South Africa worth about 14 trillion rands. So in terms of the private sector money, there is no shortage of money. So therefore, you don't want to exclude the private sector. So what we are now doing is collaborating with not only the DFIs, but the private sector. I'll come back to that. But with respect to the DFIs, for example, the new development bank, which used to be known as the BRICS Bank, we are working with them at the city of Tshwane to address wastewater at the city of Tshwane. There is a huge funding requirement. The infrastructure is very old and it's now serving more people. It needs replacement. That means we have to collaborate because the balance sheet of the DBSA is not big enough. Similarly, as we speak, my colleague last week, now that's in the metro space. In the intermediate city space, in one of our provinces in Mpumalanga, there is a very well-run municipality called Stiftswete Municipality. Now, for people who don't know South Africa very well, Mpumalanga is the coal producing area of South Africa. Now, we know that globally, the likes of the World Bank are moving away from coal. But if a country like such as South Africa is very much dependent on coal, you have to now start talking about a just transition, because that means that if you're simply going to dump coal, that simply means that those people are going to be unemployed, and then you need to look at alternative ways of funding them. And so we are collaborating with GIZ and from Germany, we are collaborating with AFD to bring in new solutions. So those are some of the examples of how we are collaborating with TFIs. We're talking, collaboration. Now, with municipalities specifically, the first thing that you have to realize, whether you're a development finance institution or you are a commercial bank or an institutional investor in South Africa, you must first understand the problems that the municipality faces and only respond to the problems that the municipality faces. In the past, including the TBSA, we would want to impose our products on the municipalities themselves. That is not a partnership that is sustainable. So what we are now talking about at the TBSA, we're talking about co-creation with municipalities, understanding what the problems are. So there we've got a number of products or areas of collaboration that we are across all the municipalities that I look after specifically. And the essence of the municipalities I look after is that 60% of South Africa's population is urbanized. By 2030, it's going to be 71%. And by 2050, 80% of South Africa's population is going to live in urban centers. So we must collaborate. And we are collaborating, informed also by national government policy. We've got an instrument called the Integrated Urban Development Framework, which is designed to respond to those demands. So those are some of the areas. It's about co-creating with our municipal partners, not simply imposing a DBSA product or a TFI product or a commercial banking product. And we are therefore also looking at catalyzing the private sector in order to enable them to fund the major infrastructure needs that still remain, not only in terms of black backlogs, but in order to support growth. You would have heard our president talking, and you would know that South Africa is a low growth country, low investment, low productivity. And all of that happens in cities. We need to therefore respond and collaborate and co-create with cities in order to create. We've got 9 million people unemployed in our country. We cannot go on like that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, I think, for sharing this. And I hear two things. The one is that there is no unique solution, and I think somebody was telling that already today when you are talking about municipal finance. The diversity of municipalities brings to the fact that we need to shape different solutions to support cities. And on the other side also, you are discussing with most of the donors, not the World Bank yet, but I think Sami here read it. But also that your role, you see the role of DBSA also to facilitate the access of private sector. And I think this is also a very critical thing. We will hear the mayors and the cities representatives, but accessing private finance means and request a lot of conditions, and I think the financial intermediaries can play this role also as a professional agency. We'll continue with the financial intermediaries. I will switch to French. Avec le directeur
with the Director General of the FICOM in Cameroon, Mr. Fiparois, who is both committed very actively to financing cities in Cameroon, but also to how to create a dialogue forum between the financial organizations, but above and beyond that and further afield. So I'd like to give you the floor now. Thank you very much, Jean-François. I am taking the floor following on from what the World Bank has said. I was very much interested by what STB has had to say about this. Now, I am the Director General of a Cameroon financing institution which finances, which is called the Special Fund for the Intermunicipality Fund, and it was set up in 1974 and provides local funding in two ways. On the one hand, it shares out resources on a quarterly basis to each of our municipalities, and we also finance projects on a municipal level. Now, this is an initiative which in 2014 led to a certain amount of projects, and now we're part of a network which is part of the African network for financing municipalities that kicked off in 2014 when the previous project came to an end. So we are seeing how we can bring in donations and also bring in and supply any necessary advice to the people concerned. Now, what we find is that the World Bank, IMF, KBFW, the European Commission generally deal state to state, or they deal with the state governments. Now, we are saying to these international bodies that we would like to be the intermediaries in this process, because FDE, KWPF, etc., they are not familiar with our organizations and they don't realize that we are the end customer. So we think that as intermediate institutions, we can really act as a go-between from these donors and be able to attract these resources and channel them towards local financing. Because what's for sure these days is that financial resources are few and far between. And as we've heard from the South African representative, all administrations are not born equal, in his words. So what we see around the world is that the large cities tend to attract an enormous amount of funds, and that helps, of course, to them. But we need to make funding arrive equally to any size of town or city now, because this helps their development, because nobody should be left behind in this whole process, the funding process. So as far as FECOM is concerned in Cameroon, we are working with the KFW and with the European Union too. We have financing from the African Development Bank, and we're currently working with the French Development Agency also to be able to have loans to help us with our local and municipal efforts. So as intermediate bodies, we are already recognized, in fact, in the new World Urban Agenda. And it needs to be plainly said here that with the World Urban Development Fund, we are very well placed on the international scene to be, first of all, recognized, which we are, and acknowledged as institutions that really take part in development on all different levels and are able to attract resources from international donors. So that's what I can say, first of all. And of course, I'll be happy to intervene later on in the discussion if required. Thank you very much indeed, Director General. It's true that what you have said, that you spoke through FECOM, and you've worked a lot through FECOM, and you've helped local funding this agency to become part of the international network and to be a real accelerator, bringing these funds in and helping to accelerate development in your municipalities. You've shown us how this is possible. It's not just words in some document somewhere. This is something that really means that there's a voice is heard on the international stage, and that's something that you have achieved. Yes, thank you. Well, as we think about the alliance that was launched through the UN General Assembly in New York, we have seen that we've opened the doors to greater financing through COP25, for example, and this has positioned us as an institution that can attract resources also for financing climate-related exercises. Thank you very much. We'll continue. We're going to be moving to Madagascar now. The Director General for financing. And we would also ask the others to say, from your perspective, what are the challenges? What's at stake here as we look at dialogue with donors, looking at access to financing and how the financing can be managed, and then also how you manage to accompany the cities and towns of Madagascar and help them to better manage and to diversify their funding. Thank you very much indeed. Well, just to put things into context, for the FDL, allow me to go back a little in time and give you an idea of what we're about. We've been up and running for 10 years now, and initially the objective was to bring about a harmonious and well-balanced development of all of the areas. So we have a large number of municipalities right across the island, and the FTL was in charge of managing and distributing the resources as they come into the local authorities. We have a calculation program which recalculates every 4 years to see how to share these out. We've had studies carried out to see how we can improve the diversification of these resources to these different bodies. We set up the fund, which is basically a sort of solidarity fund to help to support the municipalities that are least favoured. And in the FDL, that was not sufficient, but following the FDL, we have been able to manage and attract funds from bilateral cooperation and international cooperation, as with the KFW, through the inclusive, decentralized approach. We also work with the World Bank within a support program for the support and the improved efficiency of the public sector. We've also set up a program that provides support to the reform of the land sector and the property sector, so that we can decentralize this to the municipal level. Now, there are many different procedures that have to be followed, a lot of red tape for the municipalities, and we have been providing about 5,000 euros equivalent per municipality to help with these. But they see that there are funding needs, there are potentialities that can be met by the EU and by the KPW, which is so important for the municipal level. Now the FDL really can take a position and can be seen as the main lender for these municipalities, with this great potential, becoming lenders and also opening up offices where we can provide advance loans to the municipalities and their different bodies. And the current government has a policy that they want the municipalities to be the hubs and the drivers of growth across Madagascar. And the legislation in force does allow municipalities to do this. However, that's not really worked, because the financial intermediaries, the classical financial intermediaries, have not managed to play their role and have not distributed these funds. So the FDL has taken that role, and we are now the lender of choice for these urban areas and rural areas. Thank you. Well, thank you for sharing your experiences. So you're saying the local finances really are the drivers in terms of financing local development, and they also play a role as the first intermediaries for donors, and therefore we see that this is moving things forward more quickly and more efficiently as far as the financial situation is concerned in Madagascar. So we're going to remain on the local level, and we're going to see the position on the vision of local actors. We're going to start with the mayor of Banjul, who's going to present to us his experience as the mayor of Banjul. Tell me how you interact
with donors and international financial stakeholders. And I know you have a strong position on that, but how do you interact also with central authorities on this?
Thank you very much.
In 5
Mr.
minutes, if please also.
Moderator. If you ask me how do I interact with the donors, first let me acknowledge that cities are growing and definitely need financing. I am happy that my brother is here beside me from the World Bank, and from here I'm going to engage him again, and I'm sure something will come out of it. Mr. Moderator, if we talk about financing, how do cities have finance? In the context of Africa, there are key words that is very, very important to reflect on. And these are corruption, transparency, trustworthiness, maximization of revenue, capacity building, digitalization, and of course, determination, to name a few. I just reflect on these words because these are mostly words that build the boundaries between us and financiers, or better say, donors. I think it is important to know that my city, or better say, cities are different. My city is a developing city, whereas other cities are what we call today smart cities. So if you fall under the developing cities and happen to have a city in Africa, you have a very big problem. Simply because those that have money to come and invest in your country has also a yardstick to measure where their money should be invested. For example, if you go to a bank and want to have a loan, you don't just go inside the bank and the bank manager just count the money and give it to you. They look at your credibility, creditworthiness, whether you can pay back or not. And the same happens with cities as well. Before donors or financiers come and give you money, they want to see certain things that are happening in your city. And Mr. Moderator, to be quite honest, I'm not saying that the EU or the World Bank are not doing their best. They are, of course, doing their best to help, at least in the context of Gambia, to help my city. Because I can proudly say that 3 months ago, I received 3.1 million euro grant from EU. And I am very, very grateful. But what is World Bank doing for my city? This has to do also with policies. Maybe my city doesn't have the creditworthiness to have money from the World Bank. But the World Bank is giving the money directly to my central government. But is the central government bringing the money down to the community? No, it's not happening. So I think it's also very important to try to address the bureaucracy of these stakeholders. It's very, very important because I'm sure World Bank is giving money to my central government to change the lives of people, the lives of women, of course the lives of children. But if this money is used for something else, it's not given to the community, I'm sorry, my brother, then really, to me, it doesn't worth even bringing it to Gambia. We have to be very sincere here. We can be sitting here having conferences talking about financing, but if we don't understand the concept of Africa, if the stakeholders don't put their foot hard on the floor and say, no, the monies or whatever grants or funds we are giving to Africa will go to the local government, I'm sorry to use this word, but it's useless. I am a mayor. I know how it feels. I know how it feels. Let's take it in the context of this migration, whereas EU is spending a lot of money. It is true, our children are dying every day. As a mother, I feel it. As a mayor, people are coming every day in my office, crying for their loved one, for their loved ones. Yes, we don't want to lose our children in the desert. But when it happens, and EU is taking out money to help, for God's sake, go to Gambia and see whether these innocent children that lose hope already are benefiting from this money or not. I can say no. So if I sit here talking about financing, I wouldn't dwell much into it without addressing the stakeholders that are bringing the money to my country. It's not helping us. The bottom-up approach of governance is what all of us now should advocate for. The money is for the people, and the people are the community. And I've been saying this again and again. But it seems like stakeholders are not listening. Look at the impact of the 3.1 million euro that we have from EU for the first time in the history of Gambia. EU is listening and saying, okay, now we want to make a test. We are going to the grassroots. We are going to give it to the local government. And I can proudly say here that that money will be used for the community to the maximum. It's not going anywhere. Give it to our central governments, and not only in Gambia. I said the whole of Africa. Give it to them, and it vanishes in a thin air. Mr. Moderator, if you ask me once again, how do cities get finance? For us, my city, yes, it's a very small city, but cities are never small. We all have this problem of urbanization. Everybody is feeling it. My city has the same problem as Washington, because we are facing the same problems. We have the same similarities. The problem that the mayor of Washington is having is exactly the problem I am facing. But the advantage is she is enjoying more share of the cake than my own city, because my central government are not putting things in place. That is to say, there is no transparency. And that's the reality. We have to start saying it as it is to help our own children, to help our grandchildren. This diplomacy of just sitting on the conference room and saying it the way it is not is really not helping us at all. I think Africa is crying, we are tired, and we have to start shouting. We were shouting, but now we want to make it loud and clear. I therefore urge also the women that are in leadership. Push it and push it hard, and inshallah we will reach there. Coming back to the topic, it's difficult for my city to have finance because of these keywords that I just spell out here. If anybody wants to invest in Banjul, the first thing you will think of is, can they manage their revenue? Is it digitalized? can they manage their assets properly? Just as my brother said here. The international best practices that my city can benefit from is not coming the way it should be. He mentioned here that World Bank is helping some cities to rationalize their revenue. And therefore, I am also begging you in the name of God to at least talk to your colleagues also to come our aid, to come and help us. We need it. I have women who are really in need of help. Children are dying every day because of what? Malaria, or I wouldn't say hunger. I have to be very frank. If the central government did well, I give credit to them. We have peace in Gambia, but women are suffering, children are suffering. We have problem of migration, all other problems that are happening in Africa, we have our share of that as well. So please, please, my brother, I am on my knees. We will network, and I have hope that you will help your sister.
Thank
to
you very
be
much.
a woman leader is very, very difficult because people look at you as a mother and come to you every day. If it is a man, they care less, as we do. I cannot just say, just walk away from a child who is sick, whereas a man will just walk away. Sometimes they don't even care. I'm sorry to say this. My apologies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lord Mayor, Miss Lord Mayor, about this very strong speech and very bold. And I think this is also the spirit of those meetings, which are not diplomatic meetings here at the Committee of Practice. It's really to share your experience, your feeling from the field, and address it to your potential partners. And I think that's also a very good occasion to do that. And also, those, I mean, UCLG made a strong advocacy on recognizing the role of local governments in the global scape. And now they are recognized into the international agenda. But your position, and I think we do share this, everybody here, is now we need to go to the implementation phase and to interact with the different partners that can help us to implement the international agenda. So going from diplomacy to action, I think that's your key messages. Thank you very much again. We'll continue on the perspective from local perspective, sorry, with Bev Esslinger, councillor of the city of Edmonton in Canada. You can maybe share your experience, but also from the Canadian experience on the different funds that the Fédération Canadienne des Municipalités has developed.
I think every city has the same challenge. There isn't enough money to do everything you'd like to do. And I really feel your pain because I think truly we try to meet the needs of our citizen in as many ways as possible. And we have been blessed. We have a system where we all collect as cities property taxes from individuals and businesses, and that's one source of our revenue. We do depend on other orders of government to do our major infrastructure projects. But we have to become innovative in how we finance many of the projects that we do. We as a city, we invest in core infrastructure, and we hope then to attract private investment to continue to build all the surrounding infrastructure. For example, we are investing as much as we can with other orders of government in our local rail transit system. But along that route, there's a lot of investment by private partners that build the city through the development of apartments, transit-oriented development, the commercial nodes, and that allows us to grow our city in a new way. One of the things that we've done in Edmonton is because we care for our wastewater and electricity, we've actually sold that business, and we are the sole shareholder for a company called EPCOR, and we get an annual dividend now from them every year of 130 million, I believe, that comes back into our coffers to be able to spend and invest in our city. So you have to get inventive in how you work with your many partners. For us, we try to build a city that attracts as many of those partners to come in and build. And we are looking now, working with our region. We are a city of about 1 million, surrounded by many small communities. And so now we do regional economic development to try to attract additional investment into the area. And so we often say that we are hunting like a pack. We're trying to attract that investment into our communities. And by doing it together, one may get the business that comes and sets up shop that gives employment opportunities. And another municipality may reap the benefit if that's where people are living. But many of the municipalities might be the suppliers for that new business. So together we're attracting that new investment. And we know when we get new businesses, we have a new tax base, so we're able to do more things. So we're working together to create many of those opportunities. And one of the things in Canada, we also have the opportunity is to work nationally. I am a member of the federal FCM, Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and the Government of Canada has given us an endowment fund of about $1.5 billion. And we're able now to offer grants and loans to Canadian municipalities to develop some of their infrastructure, particularly that is sustainable or dealing with wastewater. So we're able to apply to that fund to be able to add additional resources into our community to make them more sustainable. So we're looking at as many innovative ways as we can, and by applying to that fund, often what we do is if you have an innovative idea, you can apply and then you can now share that information with Canadian municipalities. So we're trying to leverage the investment in our local communities. We're trying to work in a regional basis, leveraging the whole area as well as individual opportunities. So for us, when we're looking at meeting the needs of our citizens, we really are trying to look at what's beyond property taxes. How do we attract more investment to meet the needs? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think it's very interesting also to see that in a country such as Canada, there is also this needs from cities to be supported by grants on structuring innovative projects and sustainable projects. And as FMDV, we developed a similar thing at the European level with the Cities Finance Lab, where we provide technical assistance support to cities to try to develop innovative financial mechanisms, such as in Lisbon on a climate participatory budget, or in Paris with a green fund for Paris to finance the transition, which is a bit similar. So interesting also to see that not only cities from the south needs this kind of support, but also in Canada or in Europe. Let's continue now on the same continent with the representative of the city of Mexico, Mariana Flores, who maybe you can share how do you interact also as a city with international donors on sustainable development, but also how do you interact with other cities to share experiences and be inspired on those type of projects?
Thank you, Jean-François. So I agree that each city has its own challenges. Mexico City being a 9 million inhabitant cities, and then in a metropolitan area of 22 million, then the challenges are really, really hard. And even if Mexico City at the country level has the highest percentage of self-revenue of the country, we still have a lot of needs. The chief of government now, Claudia Sheinbaum, decided to reorganize a little bit the finances of the city, meaning that a lot of the operational expenses that were already there, now they are put to public investment in some of the key area or the action lines that she identified as the most important for the city. So we have there equality of rights, we have sustainability, we have mobility, we have security, we have culture and also transparency. So thinking on these 6 main axes, the idea was to reshape our budget to do that. But again, it's never enough. So what we are trying right now is to see, okay, now that Mexico City is investing a lot in these priorities, who do we want to be accompanied by? And we think that, of course, private sector is key on that, and also DFIs. And what I feel that is most needed not only as Mexico City level, but some other cities at the region, is helping us to create the proper environments within our own countries, but also at the project preparation level. I think that is key because, again, we have defined clearly what are our priorities, but then we have to think on how to present those, on how to make those projects bankable. And in Mexico City, we're working with a lot of partnerships, cooperation agencies, IFC from the World Bank, for example, trying to think on, okay, this is our priorities, these are the ideas and the projects that we have, then how to make the connections between Mexico City and their needs, and also with these different institutions and stakeholders at the world. So one of the things that we've seen is that sometimes a lot of companies and a lot of people from the private sector approach saying, okay, here I have the best technology and the best solution for your city. Yes, but the idea is that technology changes very, very fast, and then it is hard for a city like us, or I guess all of the cities, to engage in this kind of commitments for long term. So the idea is how to make the best business model, knowing that, of course, we need the private sector, that our cities are really investing a lot with public investment, but how to make the best arrange, considering the changes of technology, considering that our cities also change, and we have to fit the priorities of our citizens. So my guess is that with this community of practice, we can start looking for that, looking on how to engage with different stakeholders, but also to think on really, they already said it, like the priorities from the local people, from the local communities. Not only thinking on what fits best, what the market looks best, but thinking on the real needs of the citizens. So I guess from Mexico City, why we have been involved in these conversations with UCLG FMDB is because of that. And coming back to the point that Mr. Akoa was saying on the contribution also to the global messages that we are trying to develop, we at Mexico City organized with FMDB, for example, the preparatory conference for Habitat 3 on finance for urban development. So both ways, I think, are important to work with. I mean, the incidence of the global agendas, but also doing some more practical things on finding how to best prepare the environment for cities, one, and second, on the project preparation facilities.
Thank you very much, Mariana Flores, for this experience. Maybe also just take the opportunity to connect the experience in Mexico City with another experience that we have followed with some partners. It was in Mexican state. I can't remember the name, but the name is not important. They had a debt of $4.2 billion US dollar, and they didn't try to borrow some more money, but just to restructure the debt, because the debt was really not well organized in terms of diversification. And so some partners, they restructured the debt of the 4.2 million, and this restructuration allowed the state to save 250 million US dollar from the debt. So the idea sometimes is not just to look to additional money, but also to look your own state and see how can we improve the finance. So thank you very much, Mariana. Now to finish, we will finish with two last panelists that will share their experience from an external point of view. We have Daniel from Moody's and Komodzo Letsatsi. Maybe I will start with Daniel from Moody's, just to say, to tell us how, as a credit rating agency, do you see the landscape of municipal finance, and how do you see the opportunities also for cities to access to DFI's support or to private sector support?
Thank you. I think maybe let me start by saying it is interesting that We rate cities in Canada, we rate cities in Mexico, and close to 100 in Mexico. And maybe you ask yourself, why? Because some of these countries are developed, but they still need the rating. It shows that investors, they are risk averse. They are scared of risk. For instance, if you would want some investors to come and invest in your country, you would have to have some kind of credibility or information that you're going to show. Let me start by saying in Africa, we don't rate very much municipalities, but what we have experienced is that the key challenge that faces cities in Africa, one, of course, would be the governance. The legislation that governs the operations of municipalities is highly centralized. Now, if it is highly centralized, meaning that municipalities don't have powers to control their revenues, then it will be difficult for those municipalities to use that, whatever they collect, to be able to go and raise funding. That's number one. Number two, challenges that we also see, you would struggle to find financial information. Accountability and accessibility of data is also key. So that's what we have noted. For instance, if we speak to a number of countries, we've been to Botswana, to Kenya, we've been to a number of other countries. Now, I want to finish with South Africa because South Africa, we've always said that is kind of unique, which is true, and then I will explain a bit why. But challenges in Africa will continue if governments or several governments will always be the one receiving funds or giving transfers to local municipalities. If that is going to continue, and we're talking of urbanization, I'm sure it's going to take us even very long for us to develop. But if municipalities can be given powers to be able to exercise their creditworthiness to support the governments, then we will see a number of infrastructure being implemented. Now, a good example, for instance, now if I come to South Africa, in the past 10 years, municipalities here have spent $450 billion, about $32 billion on infrastructure. And 60% of that is still coming from transfers. But 22% of that was coming from borrowings. So it means that because the structure in South Africa allows municipalities to exercise their strength and go and borrow, then they have an opportunity to go and exercise or use their balance sheet to go to the market and raise funding. That is why we rate a number of cities. For instance, we rate 6 of the 8, and 4 of those have issued bonds in the market. And we are also looking at the secondary cities as well because they have capacity to do so. So it means that the South African government, although some they complain that they are over-regulated, but it is also key in the sense that investors they know because the debt that is issued by municipalities is not guaranteed. But for the fact that there is government behind that apply that oversight rule through the legislation, which I think in our view, if it can be applied or similar in Africa, then you will see that a number of cities will have capabilities on their own to go and issue. So the challenges I've already highlighted, but the opportunities are there in the sense that if cities can also use their balance sheet to go to the market, not everybody will depend on transfers to invest in infrastructure. If that is the case, I repeat, it will take us a long time in Africa to develop cities because governments themselves, they have got issues. We've had a number of problems here. And also, there is insufficient money to invest in infrastructure. So diversification is key. I go back to the point I made. We rate cities in Mexico and everywhere, but those are developed. But why do we rate those cities? Because investors, they want to make sure that whatever they put on the ground, there is some kind of accountability, there is some kind of transparency and continuity. So as a result of that, then you will struggle to get funding if you on your own you don't have many means to be able to show to investors that the money that you receive will be able to be repaid. And the other challenges that we also see, because the tenure of governance is about 5 years, you could see that obviously if there is any uncertainty to say investments are put on the ground, will still I get my money if the new incumbent moves or new people come in power? So that is why the government legislation is key there to make sure that investors who are putting money on the ground for the next 10, 15 years, the money will be repaid regardless of who is in power at that point in time. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Now we'll finish, last but not least, Komodzo Letsatsi to have a kind of neutral vision, because now Komodzo used to be treasury at the city of Johannesburg, used to work also at national level on finance, and now is working with different international stakeholders working on municipal finance. So from your global perspective, what will be for you the constraints and opportunities for municipalities to better work with financial intermediaries like DBSA or like the ones we had, but also with DFIs such as the World Bank and others. So what will make the thing better happen, and how to unlock the potential gap that we can see between those stakeholders?
Thank you, Jean-Francois, and now I would like to just thank UCLG for inviting me basically on this panel. I've had an opportunity to actually be in local government space, I think for like a good 10 years, obviously heading up the City of Johannesburg Treasury, and overall I've got about 20 years experience in public finance, okay? And now being on the other side as a consultant, I mean working closely with DBSA here at home, and UNCDF, I'm on the MIF program, which has basically given me the global perspective. I don't think it's actually all doom and gloom in terms of cities. And I think sometimes, because the problems are so many, you never really know where to start, but you gotta start right. So if I have to take the South African experience for argument's sake, where they started, they created an enabling policy environment for local government to be able to tap into other ways of actually financing, like the municipal bond market, which actually is still very young in the sense that the first municipal bond in South Africa was basically issued in 2004 by the City of Johannesburg. But it was the legislation that preceded cities being able to actually tap into the bond market. And I think the other advantage that South Africa had is a well-developed debt capital market, which is actually quite deep because it's dominated by institutional investors, right? But all of that actually came with huge responsibilities and benefits for the cities. I think one of them is on the accountability side, where cities were not only accountable to the officials in the cities, were not only accountable to the politicians and the constituencies around politicians, but you had investors that had to keep cities honest from a governance point of view. I mean, having unqualified audits is a non-negotiable. Data integrity in terms of financial reporting and basically reporting on time. Good practices around revenue management, billing, collecting on time. Your credibility as well in the market, where you can show the investors that if you borrow money, you're going to pay it back on time. When the coupons are due, you're going to pay those coupons basically on time. And I guess if we're going to develop municipal debt markets, that's a non-negotiable, and there's no way of doing it. But like Daniel has said, like in the case of South Africa, we're actually a country of contradictions, right? So you've got 8 metros that are running billions and billions of budgets, but you've got lower tier municipalities that are predominantly dependent on national transfers. So the customer base that they have are predominantly indigent. They can never ever be able to pay for the municipal services. But they still have a responsibility to actually deliver services to those communities in the form of water and electricity. And that's why in South Africa at the moment you've got the top 20 municipalities that are actually owing Eskom over, say, $2 billion, if you like, and they can't pay. Because I don't believe, and this is my argument, I don't believe there's any municipal manager or a CFO in local government that wakes up every day to go to work to say, I'm not going to pay my creditors. They're actually far much more structural issues that local government basically face. So for me, it's not even so much about financing. And I've heard this argument about access to finance. I don't think we've got a shortage of money. I think the biggest problem is that ideally, the cities are supposed to be a reservoir of bankable projects, because that's a phase of service delivery. So in an event where a city is predominantly dependent on national transfers, then it means the only way you could actually tap into other sources of finance is that we got to look at project financing, right? And the project financing actually starts with identifying bankable projects that can impact the lives of communities in those areas. And that's the only way you're going to get investors in. So if we took all cities and actually put them, or local authorities, in one basket, I don't think we're ever going to win or overcome the challenge around channeling investment basically into cities. And I think the other thing the last point that I probably would like to make is how DFIs and intermediaries can engage differently with cities, right? And it should not necessarily be just based on lending activities. Just given the dominance of DFIs basically in local authorities. So if I have to take DBSA for argument's sake, how they've actually restructured in the past 2-3 years to actually, service the cities better, is that there's an appreciation that there's a capacity issues within cities for certain key skills like your engineering, and of course in certain cities on the financial management side. So the project preparation aspect of it actually comes in terms of de-risking infrastructure project. On helping the cities to actually develop master plans around planning, and of course lending, and on execution and maintenance. And I think for me, that's a value chain that actually responds better to the needs in cities, and is not so much just about financing. And then if I have to take the UNCDF for argument's sake, and the work that they were doing basically in Tanzania as well, around identifying, helping to prepare projects that could be packaged so that private investors could actually be crowded in. So it's those different ways of actually doing things that would actually help us eventually to resolve the access to financing aspect of it.
Thank you very much, Komodo. I think it's your point was a kind of conclusion also of the different roles of everybody, the value chain of also on financing. So I think there are. I won't add anything on this. We still have some time, so is there any questions from the floor that we can pick up, maybe 2 or 3 questions or comments on what have been said before that? For once we have time for that, so you should take the opportunity of raising some questions. Or maybe even from the floor, if some of you wanted to interact from what some others said already.
I cannot overemphasize the point that Komodo has just made. And that's exactly what the DBSA value chain responds to. Because even with the larger metros, you're finding that there are serious capacity issues around planning. And you cannot provide services to communities if you don't know what is the total population that you have, what is the number of indigent households that you have, because the indigent households affect your revenue base. And then equally, they also affect compliance, because if you're overburdening and you're very much dependent on just a few of your middle class, there's going to be a situation where they are going to get tired because of that. So you need to be able to understand that. So that talks to the planning capacity. And then the point that was made around the need for bankable projects. The issue I think I made at the beginning is that there is no shortage of money, and Komodo has confirmed that. As I said, we've got more than nearly 14 trillion rands in Komodo. You can do the exchange rate calculation for me. But the shortage is twofold. One, well-prepared bankable projects, and secondly, well-planned projects. That is why the DBSA value chain starts with planning and then it moves to project preparation. And by the way, around that, we've got a number of products that respond to that. It's not just DBSA's own money. We have partnered with the European Union with something called the IPSA fund. It has since gone to National Treasury. But we've got a number of funds that are designed to help to get projects to bankability. Final point, I won't talk about the lending because I've spoken to that. The issue is, again, in the municipal sphere, you're finding that municipalities don't spend as much money on maintenance as they should be. And then the problem then manifests itself in two ways. One, the infrastructure deteriorates very, very quickly. And secondly, as that infrastructure deteriorates, inflation increases, and therefore the cost of building new infrastructure escalates, which then implies an overburdening of an already burdened ratepayer base. So you need to take all of that into account, and then associated with that, which was the point that Komotso was making, is around implementation. There is serious implementation capacity in South Africa, again, even with the larger metros. It's worse with the smaller municipalities. That's why the DBSA value chain talks to that, from planning to project preparation to lending to infrastructure delivery, as well as maintenance. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe one point on the project preparation, because I think we all agree that this is the key issue from an investor side, but also from a local government side. As a mayor, how can I make my project bankable for the conditions of investors or DFIs? And for DFIs, how can I support cities to prepare bankable projects? And as FMDV, we mapped in the world more than 100 of project preparation facilities for cities. It means that we have 100 instruments that are made to support cities to develop their project at technical and financial level and to make it bankable. But on a daily basis, as FMDV, when we discuss with mayors and municipalities, they tell us we don't have the information. We don't know about those mechanisms. And also the donors, they say, we are underspending our project preparation facilities because we don't have project to support. So there is a gap between the needs of the mayor and the opportunities of getting support from the DFIs on that. And I think also this kind of committee of practice that we are organizing are targeting these objectives to make different stakeholders speak to each other in order to know that on the local side there are different projects and different issues, but also that there are different opportunities to get finance, not on investment, but also support as a grant support to make the project bankable. So, and I'm sure that this will open discussions between the mayor of Banjul and the World Bank, for example, to better know how can you work together. But so that's really the core idea of this committee of practice that UCLG has developed together with FMDV. And maybe another word. And then we conclude.
Just one other comment. 21st century South Africa, 21st century Africa requires a different type of funding mechanism. So on the lending side, for example, South African municipalities, again, the larger metros have been very much dependent on balance sheet lending. We need to move from that. We need to move to different instruments that talk to how we bring in the private sector. We're talking to project financing. We're talking to triple Ps, for example, tax increment financing. All of those instruments we need to explore, because the values, especially for municipalities whose property values are increasing, how do you explore that to bring in, a different type of fund or alternative funding instruments? So not only in South Africa, but I think African cities, we need to start exploring those, because that way you are tapping into a very well-resourced, not only local financing base, but a global financing base that is looking for bankable projects, but then alternative funding instruments as well.
Yeah.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. And I think that was a kind of conclusion word on the different things. My last words maybe will be about the committee of practice that we are just launching with the UCLG. That was one of the first meetings we had. We had one meeting last year in Madrid, and the idea is really to organize meeting on an annual basis or different ways in the year. And so together with UCLG, we will try to reach you in order to know on which topic you would like also to continue this dialogue between on cities and municipal finance topic, and also to call for proposals from countries, from partners or from cities to host some meetings on this. Like if one of you wants to host a meeting on a committee of practice on a particular topic, then we will be very keen also in discussing with all of you to know how to prolong this kind of discussion. So I would like maybe a big applause for the different panelists here. Thank you very much for your intervention, and also maybe a big thank to the interpreter in the back that helped us on this. Thank you very much and have a good evening.